With the 4th season of Cobra Kai releasing to Netflix, the talk is going to be surrounding that for a while. But what not a lot of people are talking about is how TV became more and more serialized over the years. Some shows have always been more serialized than others, but the vast majority of them were still episodic to a degree. You could turn on a random episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine and still get a feel for what was going on in the show, as long as it wasn't an episode from one of the later seasons. I'm talking like seasons, 5, 6, or 7. The new approach to making TV shows seems to be interconnect every single episode to serve the overall narrative, aka have no standalone episodes that can contribute to character development or world building. The title of this video is How Serialization is Killing Television, so let's get right into the argument. But before we get into the argument, I think it's important to note how TV shows used to make money, and how they made money was simply just one word: syndication. Now, what is syndication? For those that don't know, syndication is a license that other TV networks pay to air reruns of your TV series. Think about episodes of The Big Bang Theory on TBS, or Friends on TBS, Nick at Night, XYZ Network that shows any other comedy, Family Guy on Adult Swim, 2.5 Men on the FX network, so on and so forth. It's extremely rare that a TV show ever made its money back during the initial run of whatever the primary network was. The reason why shows were more episodic for decades was for this. It was the idea that you could jump into any show at any time. If you happen to catch a random episode of Fantasy Island or Star Trek, you could have a basic understanding of what's going on. Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, one of the creators, and I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, that's a whole other video for another time, had a rule that no two Starfleet officers could get into an argument. And in my opinion, this rule has been misinterpreted because Dr. McCoy and Mr. Spock got into arguments almost every single episode of the original series. It was just the arguments that McCoy and Spock had wouldn't carry over from episode to episode. An argument from episode 12 wouldn't be referenced in episode 35. That was just good television in terms of writing. If anyone can jump in at any point, then there isn't a lot of pressure to watch each and every single episode of a show. You could catch a random episode of Gilligan's Island or Star Trek and be fine, as long as you understood with the former, it's about a group of people stranded on a deserted island, and the latter was a grand space adventure. That's all you needed to know. Now, syndication can start at any point after the show comes out. I remember seeing episodes of 2.5 Men on the FX network while the show was still running on CBS from 2003 to 2015. And Adult Swim still ran episodes of Family Guy up until recently, even though they were still airing on Fox. There isn't a rule for when syndication can start, but it starts earlier for some shows and later for others. If the show is serialized, then it's much harder to jump into. Therefore, the syndication value is lower because a network like FX or TBS or Adult Swim can't show a couple of random episodes per night from season 4, and then 2 more from season 5 the next night, and then 2 more episodes from season 6, the following night, so on and so forth. You guys get my point. That's why so many sitcoms were made for so long. Not only were they cheaper to make in the beginning, it was easier to sell them in syndication because average sitcoms reset at the end of every episode, with a couple of exceptions, of course. There's always an exception to every rule. Police procedurals like CSI, NCIS, Law and Order, etc., are made for the same reasons. They're cheap, and given their episodic nature, it's easier to sell them in syndication, again, with a couple of exceptions. Now, there are some great examples of serialization, and the 3 shows that I hear about with regards as great examples of serialization are Breaking Bad, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and Sons of Anarchy. While all 3 of these shows were serialized, what was one thing that all 3 of these shows had in common? They started as episodic TV shows that became more serialized as the show went on. Everyone claims that Deep Space Nine was only about building to the Dominion War, but there was a lot more to DS9 than just the Jem'Hadar and the Dominion War. Why wasn't it called Star Trek The Dominion War? Breaking Bad was more of a soap opera than anything. It was basically just a soap opera about meth dealers. Breaking Bad changed over time, though. It started by showing how someone like Walter White with piling medical bills could get involved in the drug trade, as a small timer, and to become one of the top people, eventually to lead his own empire. And now there are overarching narratives in all three shows. You know, Star Trek Deep Space Nine was the Dominion War. If we're looking at the overall narrative, I'm not talking episode to episode. Breaking Bad was Walter White's rise and fall as a meth dealer, and Sons of Anarchy was about Jax Teller following in his father's footsteps with Sam Crow and making the club more legit. Now, I'll be honest, I threw Sons of Anarchy in there because Sons of Anarchy was one of my favorite shows for quite a while, but still, just because a show has an overarching narrative doesn't mean it's serialized. Most shows that are serialized from episode 1. So think of shows like Game of Thrones, The Legend of Korra, Cobra Kai, House of Cards, The Mandalorian, the list goes on and on. Now let's dig into the problems with serialization. Now there are a lot of problems with this format of television, but for the sake of time, let's just focus on 5 main problems. And the first main problem with serialization is that you have a loss of memorable episodes. When shows were more episodic, obviously the storylines wouldn't extend beyond the 1 episode with the occasional 2-parter thrown in here and there. Sometimes we would get a 3-parter, but that was usually reserved for the series finale or very, very rare occasions. Now, not all of the episodes were great. In fact, depending on the type of show that you're watching, it could be a filler episode at best just to pad out the season. With regards to serialized television, because every episode is relying on intertextuality, a single episode that stands out from the crowd is becoming ever more and more rare. Now, for those that don't know, intertextuality is a term that is used in literature. What it means is a reference to another separate and distinct text within a text. So basically, if I have to watch episodes 1 through 4 in order to watch episode 5, then that is intertextuality. Now let's compare 2 separate shows. Avatar: The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra. Both shows are set in the same universe, but one show is more episodic and the other show is serialized. When you think of episodes from Avatar: The Last Airbender, what are some of the episodes that are considered the best in the series? Well, you've got The Storm, The Blue Spirit, The Cave of Two Lovers, Zuko Alone, The Tales of Ba Sing Se, The Avatar and the Fire Lord, The Puppet Master, the list goes on and on. What is something that all of these episodes have in common? They're all 1-episode storylines. Tales of Ba Sing Se is actually an anthology episode, but you get my point. I guarantee you, if you've seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, you're probably thinking of all those episodes that I listed off as you just saw them yesterday. Now let's look at The Legend of Korra. This was the show that decided to solely focus on one primary storyline per season. Season 1 was all about benders versus non-benders. Actually a compelling storyline, but nothing significant was done with it because you never really saw anything regarding this fight even after it was revealed that the leader of the non-benders was a bloodbender. That storyline just gets dropped because it failed. The second season had to hit the reset button twice because the storyline was going nowhere. That's not the point though. There is not one standalone episode of The Legend of Korra that I can think of that I want to go out of my way to watch, because you have to watch the show from start to finish because that's what the plot dictates. Because of intertextuality, nothing is allowed to stand on its own. It must rely on the prior episodes in order to deliver a narrative. Anything that could be interesting to explore can't, because the writing of the show dictates that every episode must be connected, and you can't have one standalone unless if that standalone episode is being used as a reset button, a la Legend of Korra Book 2, Episodes 7 and 8 Beginnings, about the very first Avatar, that was set up in order to destroy the Avatar spirit later that season, effectively hitting a very hard reset button, not just for The Legend of Korra, but to sever all ties to Avatar: The Last Airbender as well. Now we get to the second problem with serialization, and that is a loss of character moments. This point actually connects to the prior about a loss of memorable episodes. Zuko Alone and The Beach from Avatar: The Last Airbender were entirely character-driven episodes. A show that is heavily reliant on intertextuality really cannot afford to have episodes that are considered quote-unquote downtime because the plot must move along. There is no better example of this than Netflix's Cobra Kai, originally on YouTube Red, I do know that. If you look at the show, none of the characters' relationships even matter. Look at Sam and Miguel from season 1. They didn't hook up until the end of episode 7, and then broke up at the end of episode 9. Then you had Hawk and Moon's relationship, which had all the depth of a guy with a girl around his arm. Now look, I did that back my junior year of high school. Every day I would escort 1 or 2 cheerleaders down to their practice, 1 on each arm. Did that mean that I was in a relationship with either of them? No, but it could be perceived that way. And sometimes perception is not always reflective of reality. Now look at the rivalry between Sam and Tori. Before the season 2 finale, that West Valley High brawl, those two only had 3 run-ins with each other before they were a quote-unquote rivalry. There was nothing clear in the show that Sam versus Tori was a powder keg that was waiting to blow, because intertextuality required that the plot advance forward despite any character moments. Now imagine if Cobra Kai were more episodic. Imagine if it leaned more into its ensemble cast. If the show were to allow for quote-unquote downtime, where these characters could interact and it wasn't about this Miyagi-Do versus Cobra Kai rivalry, we would actually, would we see actual character growth? Would we see reasons for these characters getting involved in a massive brawl that wasn't superficial? Maybe, but we'll never know. Because Cobra Kai's plot must advance and have no downtime, no character moments, all of the fighting feels superficial at best because of a lack of information. Movies and television are a show-me medium, not a tell-me medium. Don't tell me Sam and Tori have a rivalry, show me the rivalry. Don't tell me Hawk and Moon or Sam and Miguel or Dimitri and Yasmin are in a relationship, show me that these characters are in relationships. There is something that sitcoms do, if this is something that sitcoms actually do very, very well, is show the characters' relationships evolve over the course of the show. Think of Hyde and Jackie from That 70s Show, Robin and Barney from How I Met Your Mother, Monica and Chandler from Friends, so on and so forth. There's a lot more examples I could probably list off, but we'd be here for the next 2 hours. You know, now let's advance into the third problem with serialization, and really what that third problem is it sacrifices world building. Now this problem only applies to new shows, as shows that are set within the same world/universe of a pre-existing IP don't have an issue with this. Cobra Kai being an example where world building isn't necessary, given that the show takes place in the same world as the movies do. Now, there is a hard rule in television that 90% of your world building must be accomplished by the end of the first season. If you watch shows like Avatar: The Last Airbender, sure, some of those storylines from the first season didn't go anywhere, but it was all about the world building. Because serialization calls for a more quote-unquote economic approach to the show, this is just yet another thing that gets sacrificed. The world building can occur over a longer period of time like it did in Game of Thrones, or just be absent entirely like it was in The Legend of Korra. I know that this may sound like a contradiction of my earlier statement about shows with pre-existing IPs not worrying about world building, but let's look at The Legend of Korra once again compared to Avatar: The Last Airbender. It takes place 80 years after the end of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and we now see these major metropolitan cities and technological advancements with radios, zeppelins, and automobiles. Because the seasons of Legend of Korra were more focused on serialization, we couldn't have episodes like Tales of Ba Sing Se or The Cave of Two Lovers where world building was the primary focus. Instead, the show had to focus on whatever the narrative was for that particular season. We were just supposed to accept that these major metropolitan cities and technological technological advancements happened with absolutely no explanation for either. Now let's get into the fourth problem with serialization, and that's the fact that a lot of these shows nowadays just feel like extended movies. With serialization cutting out quote-unquote filler and ignoring character moments to only focus on narrative, are these showrunners just wanting to make movies but were forced to make TV shows? And I'm not referring to miniseries here, where it's meant to be an 8, 9, or 10 episode ordeal and that's it. Band of Brothers could never be made into a 2.5 hour movie or even a 3.5 hour war epic. Turning Band of Brothers into a movie wouldn't do that story any justice. But how many times have we seen a movie be forced to become a TV show? The Book of Boba Fett was originally a Boba Fett movie until Solo, a Star Wars story, bombed in the box office and was canceled along with an Obi-Wan Kenobi movie, allegedly. Again, that Obi-Wan Kenobi movie I don't believe has ever been confirmed. Disney Plus's Hawkeye was originally going to be a 2.5-hour movie before they decided to make a 6 to 7 hour streaming series. How many more shows are out there that have the same fate? The Book of Boba Fett and Hawkeye are two of the ones that got this treatment that we know of. Was Cobra Kai originally supposed to be a miniseries that got extended? The Legend of Korra was originally a miniseries before that got extended to a full-blown TV series. If Cobra Kai were originally a miniseries that got extended, it's not like the showrunners embraced the fact that they were making a TV show, keeping the seasons 10 episodes long and just under 6 hours in length. And the final problem with serialization that we're going to touch on in this video, again, just for the sake of time, there are many, many more problems with serialization, but again, just for sake of time, we're going to keep it to 5. The fifth and final problem is this, economical versus practical storytelling debate. Now, there's no denying that having shows that have seasons that are only 10 episodes in length and come in under 6 hours total is much better for sitting down and binging a show in a single day. But is that a good thing or a bad thing? Some shows, like Game of Thrones, absolutely benefited from having 10 episode seasons, but those episodes were an hour long each. The season never overstayed its welcome. The show I feel is hurting the most from this approach is Cobra Kai. Because the episodes come in at 30 to 35 minutes on average, and there's only 10 per season, there isn't any time to explore the nuances in the world. What has changed, what has changed since the original Karate Kid movies, and even the various characters since they cast an ensemble. The West Valley High Brawl from Season 2 felt superficial because almost no time was given to show the rivalry between Miyagi-Do and Cobra Kai beyond a surface level of Miyagi-Do are the good guys and Cobra Kai are the bad guys. A TV show, if done right, can show that neither side is truly good or truly bad. That's where Cobra Kai could have shined had the show not been so serialized to the point where the primary narrative takes focus over everything else. Cobra Kai is so economical in its approach to storytelling that it's actually hurting the show more than helping it. But on the flip side, just so that this doesn't come across as me slamming any show with a season of less than 15 episodes, The Walking Dead has been abysmal in this regard. It had a serialization approach, but the 16 episode seasons are actually hurting them. They have to drag out the story. They have to drag that story out to fit that 16 episode mark. People were all for it in the beginning up until they realized that the show was building to nothing. The only thing that the show was building to was character deaths. The 9th season of The Walking Dead was literally a countdown to the death of Rick Grimes. That was it. There was nothing substantial to The Walking Dead other than find a place to call home during zombie apocalypse, run into bad guy worse than zombies, the new home gets destroyed, rinse and repeat. The Walking Dead could have benefited from having 10 episode seasons because it would have forced the writers to cut out all of the unnecessary fluff, all of that unnecessary stuff to fluff out the season to 16 episodes because the network demanded it. The point I'm trying to make here is that there is no one-size-fits-all approach. Some shows do a lot better when there's restraints like a 10-episode season with 30-minute episodes, or in the case of Peaky Blinders, 6-episode seasons with 1-hour episodes. But there are other shows that are being harmed because the seasons are 13 to 16 episodes with 1-hour episodes. Think of The Walking Dead, the Marvel Netflix shows, etc., etc. I don't want to be here for the next hour. Just because the show is more economical in terms of storytelling doesn't mean it's the most practical. Just because a show is more episodic in nature, but has a 20 to 24 episode season where only 3 or 4 of those episodes are good, isn't the most practical either. It has to be taken on a case-by-case basis. Just because a 10 episode season with 30-minute episodes works for show A doesn't mean it's going to work for show B. Just because a 16 episode season with 1-hour episodes works for show C doesn't mean it's going to work for show D. Now, can serialization work? Well, to answer this, I'm going to use an analogy and try to follow along with this. I swear I'm making a point here. You know, think of a nice juicy hamburger. What is the prime meat to fat ratio for a hamburger patty, for those that know? For those that don't know, it's 80-20. 80% meat, 20% fat. The meat just by itself doesn't produce that great of flavor, but the fat really makes that burger juicy and enjoyable to eat. Just because there are filler episodes within a season of a TV show doesn't necessarily mean that it's the worst thing in the world. Earlier, I brought up episodes of Avatar: The Last Airbender that could be written off as filler episodes, but are considered some of the best episodes in the series. You don't want a hamburger patty to contain too much fat, because then all you're tasting is gristle. The flavor of the meat is gone. The same can be said about not wanting too little fat in your hamburger patty. Sure, you have more meat, but without the fat, the hamburger can be tough and tasteless. A TV show should always strive for an 80-20 in terms of its seasons. 80% of the season should concern the primary narrative of the season that then plays into the overall narrative of the show. But you need a filler episode thrown in for the sake of one of two things: world building or character development, sometimes a combination of both. Can serialization provide good world building and good character development? In some cases, yes, but we've seen it more and more with some of these shows ignoring their world building and character development for the sake of the primary narrative. Remember, some of the shows that utilize serialization very well started off episodic and then got more serialized over time. Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Sons of Anarchy, Breaking Bad, The Office, etc., etc. And folks, that's all I've got for you. Let me know how you guys feel about serialization. Do you believe that it's an overall good? Do you believe it's an overall good or an overall bad thing to have happened to TV shows? Do you feel that it needs to be, or do you feel that it needs to be judged on a case-by-case basis? So anyway, guys, I'm going to go ahead and end it right here. If you stuck around this long, thanks so much for doing so. And if you've been following me long enough, you know I am terrible at ending these videos, so I will just see you guys next time.